Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. Major diplomatic developments are shaping this week's international landscape. South Korea's National Security Advisor Lee Sung-lac and Trade Minister Han-koo are in Washington preparing for the crucial groundwork for the anticipated Korea-U.S. summit amid delicate tariff discussions. President Lee Jae Myung is set to dispatch envoys to an unprecedented number of countries, including the U.S., China, Japan, Australia, and India, signaling an expanded diplomatic strategy. Now, globally, President Trump continues navigating the Ukraine conflict, offering Patriot missile support to Zelenskyy while warning Putin of new sanctions. Trump's broader Middle East initiative also progresses, marked by his historic lifting of sanctions on Syria and ongoing ceasefire negotiations in Gaza. Meanwhile, China's Xi Jinping is absent from the BRICS summit in Brazil, fueling speculation about internal instability and his health. So today we unpack these crucial diplomatic shifts and explore their wider implications for global stability. For this, we are joined by Min Jung-hoon, professor at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy, here in the studio with us. A big welcome, Professor.
Good evening.
And also joining us online is Daniel Connolly, Associate Professor of International Relations at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Good to see you, Professor.
Thank you for inviting me.
So let's start with Professor Min. So like I've said, the Trump administration's tariff waiver is nearing its expiration, and Korea's National Security Advisor Lee Sung-lac has arrived in Washington, reportedly, and he stressed the need for senior engagement to meet top officials in Washington over there. It's our first minister-level visit to Washington since President Lee has taken office. Would you expect some progress in terms of tariff talks or summit coordination?
Yeah, basically, I expect that the high-ranking officials' visit to Washington this time would provide the favorable the environment for the ongoing negotiations between South Korea and U.S. And as you mentioned, the South Korea's National Security Advisor Lee Sung-lac is visiting Washington for talks with his U.S. counterparts like State Secretary Marco Rubio on various issues that will include the trade negotiations and potential summit meeting between President Lee Jae Myung and President Donald Trump. And specifically, Lee Sung-lac said that South Korea and U.S. have been closely discussing trade and security issues, and his visit is intended to deepen those consultations. And he also said that the negotiations are going through a critical phase, and it is necessary for high-level officials like him to get more involved in the negotiations. So he has come to visit Washington to talk with his U.S. counterparts and try to show South Korea's strong intention to actively negotiate with the U.S. And in a parallel, the diplomatic effort, Trade Minister Han-koo is also visiting Washington to lead the trade negotiations. And Lee Sung-lac said that their visit to Washington is part of the government's all-out effort to address the situation. And meanwhile, regarding a potential presidential summit meeting between the two countries, Lee Sung-lac confirmed that it was on the agenda of his upcoming discussions with his counterparts, like the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. So overall, their visit to Washington this time shows that Lee government is working hard to cope with the important issues in its relations with the U.S., like the trade negotiations and holding a summit meeting between the two countries in each early days in office. As you know, the ROK-U.S. relations account for about half of the South Korea, the diplomatic relations overall.
So this latest visit must carry a lot of weight. We'll have to wait for more results coming in. But speaking of the Korea-U.S. summit, there are two views. So hold the summit as soon as possible or wait until sensitive issues are kind of resolved. Professor Connolly, which approach do you think would be more beneficial for South Korea? All right, Professor Connolly, I think we are experiencing some technical difficulties right now. So we will get right back to you just after this next question. We will speak to Professor Min first. So President Lee Jae Myung is reportedly preparing to send special envoys to more countries, you know, like I've said in the beginning, to U.S., China, Japan, Australia, and more. How do you think this approach of, you know, sending a lot of envoys to countries compare with past governments? And what is the main goal behind this outreach?
Yes, as you mentioned, it is known that Lee government plans to send special envoys to major countries this month. And the presidential office said that it is reviewing a plan that send envoys to 10 countries, including U.S., Japan, China, European Union, Australia, Canada, France, and India. And it is part of broader diplomatic outreach efforts. And the such a diplomatic move can be seen as an effort to strengthen the foundation for summit diplomacy by sending special envoys who can brief on President Lee's state of affairs policy and deliver friendly messages to widen exchange. And the presidential office also said that the government is trying to appoint special envoys who can appropriately explain its governing philosophy and the foreign policy agendas. And compare with the previous government, Lee government is planning to send special envoys to more countries, so including Canada and India and France. For example, former President Yoon Suk-yeol sent a policy consultation delegation to only 2 countries, U.S. and Japan, and the former President Moon Jae-in sent special envoys to U.S., China, Japan, Russia, and EU early in his presidency. So sending special envoys to 10 countries shows that Lee government is trying to expand the scope of its diplomacy based on its national interests and establish the foundation to be a global core state or global leading state in the international community.
It definitely signals the Lee administration's ambitious diplomatic strategy. Now let's connect back to Professor Connolly. Are you there, Professor?
Yes, I hope you can hear me now.
I can hear you very perfectly right now. So let's go back to our previous question about the Korea-U.S. summit. Like I've said, there are 2 views: holding the summit as soon as possible or waiting until sensitive issues have been recovered. Which do you think would be more advantageous for Korea?
Normally, in a period of normal diplomacy, the summit comes at the end of all the groundwork and the expert meetings before the leaders even get a chance to meet. But the Trump era doesn't really follow normal diplomatic rules. And I do think a leader summit in the Trump era is sometimes very effective to break a logjam. If there's some obstacles in the way, Trump can sometimes erase them in an instant. But I think this is a problematic strategy for South Korea because most leaders who succeed in this kind of one-on-one with Trump tend to either be strongman types or extremely submissive and even shameless leaders who very kind of bow the knee to him quite openly. And I think it's safe to say that President Lee doesn't fit either of these categories. So having a one-on-one summit with President Trump before a lot of the sensitive details are solved, I think could be very problematic for South Korea. And we don't want to see President Lee kind of embarrassed in this kind of one-on-one summit because the U.S. alliance is so important to South Korea.
So more of a wait-and-see approach would be a little bit advantageous for Korea considering the situation right now. Now, let's turn to global affairs, Professor Connolly. President Trump continues to navigate the Ukraine conflict and offered Patriot missile support to Zelenskyy while warning Putin of new sanctions as well. After Trump's recent call with Putin yielded no progress, Russia actually launched a major summer offensive. Professor, what's Putin's current strategy there?
Yeah, I definitely think that Putin believes time is on his side. The Israeli war with Iran has really depleted air defense missiles in Israel and to some extent in the United States. I think even if Trump wants to give more Patriots to Ukraine, there's only so many being produced a year. And this is kind of an opportunity for Russia to use its drone and missile strikes to degrade a lot of the Ukrainian logistics and supply lines ahead of the summer offensive. And I don't think Putin expects a breakthrough this summer. This is an attritional war. Even though some Ukrainian successes like Operation Spiderweb really embarrassed the Russians, it hasn't fundamentally changed the balance of power. And I think the Russian economy is doing much stronger than many experts expected, especially earlier in the war. And just last week, there were reports that the Chinese foreign minister told European Union officials that China does not want Russia to fail in Ukraine. And I think all of this is contributing to a sense in Putin's kind of inner circle that Russia can do another year, another 2 years, or even longer while the West remains disunited and American supplies dwindle, even if there are some token shipments of Patriots in the near future.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about ties with Russia then, Professor Min? Well, President Trump has hinted at additional sanctions against Russia. He also suggested, resuming support for Patriot missile systems. Do you think this could lead to any significant changes in U.S.-Russia relations or the war in Ukraine in general?
Well, there may be a possibility that U.S. could lean toward Ukraine over Russia, considering that President Trump is very disappointed in President Putin in terms of not following what Trump wants to end the Ukraine war. But I think it is still much more plausible to say that U.S. want to mainly negotiate with Russia to end the war as quickly as possible, and it want to secure its economic interests by enhancing its cooperation with Russia, not Ukraine. So currently, Russia is trying to secure as much the Ukraine territory as possible to gain an advantageous position in ceasefire negotiations in the near future. And to this end, it is ignoring President Trump's request to cease fire and continuing its military operations. And it is reported that Russia is gradually taking over more Ukraine territory. And meanwhile, Ukraine, which has difficulty in receiving enough military support from U.S. now, is showing limitations in fighting back against Russian attacks. So now it is losing more of its territory. And President Trump expressed his dissatisfaction with President Putin, who is continuing the war. And he also showed his the willingness to resume support for Patriot missile systems to Ukraine. However, I think it's still too early to say that this situation is a clear signal that U.S. is shifting and leaning toward Ukraine over Russia. Of course, how much longer President Putin continues to war while ignoring President Trump's request to end the war with a ceasefire could mainly affect U.S. position with Russia and Ukraine, but it seems unlikely that U.S. will drastically change its position that prioritizes ending the war quickly through negotiations with Russia. So it seems more appropriate to see the current situation as President Trump just expressing his dissatisfaction with Russia for now.
Too early to judge right now first. Now, let's turn to President Trump's broader Middle East initiative. He has been, there are speculation actually about a possible meeting between President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu today in the coming hours. So given the ongoing Gaza ceasefire talks, do you think today's discussions could lead to some meaningful progress, Professor Connolly?
I think it's going to be a really interesting meeting. Both leaders are going to congratulate themselves on their surprise attacks on the Iranian nuclear program. I think there's going to be quite a bit of maybe disputes about who's the one most responsible for this victory. But when it comes to finding a permanent end to the Gaza war, there is a very important difference in terms of the Israeli and the US position. Netanyahu, he kind of needs the state of exception that's represented by the war in Gaza for his personal political survival. Domestically, he's facing corruption and bribery investigations, and his own right-wing coalition partners, they want the war to continue in Gaza. They have very extremist kind of agendas, maybe even ethnic cleansing in Gaza. So for him to end the war, it might cause a political crisis for him. On the other hand, Trump very much wants to make a deal. This is part of his kind of agenda to make peace in the Middle East, more broadly to integrate Israel in the region. So Israeli leaders cannot ignore Trump's demands for peace. So even during the negotiations for a truce in the war in Iran, there are reports that Trump's outburst of anger towards the Israelis really shocked them. And I think this exemplifies how the US have a lot of leverage over Israel. The question is President Trump ready to use this leverage? And my expectation is perhaps a temporary ceasefire, return of hostages at best, but probably not a lasting peace deal. And this will be something that can give Trump a temporary victory to post on social media. And for the Israelis, this will give a pause in the war and continue the state of exception for the Israeli prime minister.
So a little bit complex situation for lasting peace. Now, let's turn to the BRICS summit led by China and Russia. It took place in Brazil from July 6th to the 7th, but apparently President Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin were notably absent. Professor Min, and there are currently speculations about President Xi Jinping's health or political instability due to his absence there, but China has been rejecting that. But there are still some speculations. Why do you think these speculations around the Chinese leadership continue to arise?
Well, it's not still certain what's happening in Beijing. Like as you mentioned, the President Xi has a health problem or he's losing power. Not sure anything. But personally, I think that neither is the case for President Xi Jinping this time. As you know, after securing a third term in 2023 and appointing his close associate to key positions in the Chinese government, President Xi's power became absolute and very strong. And the first is within the Chinese Communist Party that could track President Xi's power disappeared. And as a result, principles and discipline became loose, and corruption and other problems began to appear in the Chinese government. And as such problems became more frequent, President Xi felt the need to establish discipline more firmly, and therefore he focused on resolving domestic problems and probably decided not to attend the BRICS summit this time. And it is known that such problems have been almost resolved, and President Xi has come back to the media and the public and showed that his leadership is strong and solid. So it shows that there has been no major problem with President Xi's power, and therefore his leadership is expected to remain solid in the coming years.
All right, Professor, thank you for the analysis. So across, Washington, Beijing, and beyond, today, this week, a lot of diplomatic signals have been happening. It shows that it's really interconnected to each other. So we'll keep track of whether these moves would lead to more momentum moving forward. But as of now, we'll have to wrap up our discussion at this point. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights tonight, Professor Min.
Thank you.
And Professor Connolly, we appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.